After the war, the world learned of the horrors inside Nazi concentration camps. Among the most shocking revelations was the role of women, ordinary women who became guards and carried out daily acts of violence. At Bergen-Belsen, their brutality left survivors scarred, and when the Allies arrived, these guards faced swift justice. Their execution would go down as one of the most chilling punishments of the post-war years. Inside the camps, violence was more than a set of orders from above. It was a culture, shaped by rules on paper but defined by how guards chose to act. Some inflicted terror with merciless cruelty, others earned reputations as less brutal, though still complicit. Their stories reveal how deeply individuals became part of the system, and how accountability finally caught up with them. But who were these women? How did they rise in the camps? And why did their executions leave such a haunting legacy? But to understand the women of Bergen-Belsen, we first have to look at where many of them began. The culture that consumed the camps was not born overnight. It was shaped in earlier places like Majdanek, where female guards learned how to wield power, how to enforce order, and how far they could go. This culture of violence took shape not only through commands from above, but through the choices and actions of the guards themselves. At Majdanek, for example, 28 women served between 1942 and 1944. Each of them shaped the camp's atmosphere in their own way, and survivors remembered them with starkly different words. Some became infamous for merciless beatings, while others were remembered as distant, yet still part of the same machinery. Two figures stood out. Hermine Braunsteiner, born in Vienna in 1919, quickly gained a reputation for her brutality. She began at Ravensbrück, moved to Majdanek as a deputy chief overseer, and by 1944 had risen to head overseer of another camp. Survivors described her as relentless and cruel, someone who seemed to embody the violence of the system itself. Alongside her was Herta Ehlert, older and different in reputation. She too began at Ravensbrück before transferring to Majdanek, where she was remembered as stricter, less openly violent, but still a willing participant in camp life. Stories like theirs show how women not only entered the camp system, but built long careers within it. Some rose through the ranks, others remained as guards, but all of them became part of the system that turned prisoners into numbers and lives into expendable labor. What began as a job became a role that tied them to violence and control, day after day, year after year. When Bergen-Belsen was liberated in April 1945, these careers of cruelty came to an end. On April 15th, British troops entered the camp expecting a routine surrender. What they found was beyond belief. More than 60,000 prisoners were still alive, but barely. Over 10,000 corpses lay scattered across the camp, some stacked in piles, others left where they had fallen. The smell of death hung heavy in the air. Children sat in silence, their eyes hollow, while the sick lay in ditches too weak to move. The soldiers realized they had not walked into a battlefield but into a graveyard with walls. Disease consumed the camp. Typhus, dysentery, and tuberculosis spread faster than hope. Even after liberation, hundreds died each day. The British quickly shifted from military victory to emergency relief. Doctors were called in. Temporary hospitals were set up. Food, water, and medicine were rushed to the survivors. But for many, help had come too late. As aid efforts continued, another mission began inside the camp: the hunt for those responsible. Some guards tried to disappear into the crowd, shedding their uniforms and blending among prisoners. But survivors knew their faces. They pointed them out one by one. Names surfaced quickly. Joseph Kramer, the commandant, known as the Beast of Belsen. Irma Grese, just 21 years old, infamous for her beauty and her cruelty, called by survivors the Beautiful Beast. Others soon followed. Those captured did not resist. They stood silently as British soldiers dragged them from the crowd. Some tried to deny their roles, but they could not escape the mountains of evidence around them. The corpses, the starvation, the testimony of survivors, all of it spoke louder than their words. As the camp was disinfected and cleared, British officers prepared to bring these men and women to justice. In the nearby town of Lüneburg, a courtroom was arranged for what became the first major war crimes trial held by the British. 45 people stood accused, 25 men and 20 women. Their crimes were not tied to battlefield decisions, but to humanity itself: murder, torture, starvation, and neglect carried out against civilians. The trial opened in September 1945. Survivors took the stand and recounted their suffering. Some broke down, others spoke with unwavering strength. They told of beatings for whispers, of children left to die in latrines, of prisoners tortured for scraps of bread. Evidence filled the courtroom: photographs of emaciated bodies, guard rosters, medical records, and camp reports. One by one, the horrors of Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz were laid bare before the judges. The defendants shifted uneasily. Some denied everything. Others claimed they had only followed orders. But the survivors' voices cut through those excuses. Justice did not bend. On November 17, 1945, the verdicts were delivered. 11 were sentenced to death, including Joseph Kramer and Irma Grese. Their crimes were too severe, too deliberate, too deeply tied to the suffering of thousands. 19 others received prison sentences, and 7 were acquitted for lack of direct evidence. The message was clear: obedience would not excuse cruelty. The condemned were sent to Hamelin prison under British guard. There were no public displays, no speeches, no last-minute rescues. Each one waited in silence for the day of their execution. They were kept under strict watch. No visitors, no messages from the outside world, just the knowledge that their time was running out. On December 13, 1945, Albert Pierrepoint, Britain's most experienced executioner, arrived at the prison. His presence was quiet but final. One by one, the condemned were led to the gallows. There were no cameras, no audience, only the sound of footsteps, chains, and the creak of wood. Irma Grese was among the first. At just 21, she had already carved her place in history as one of the most infamous guards of the Nazi camps. She walked to the rope with no visible fear, no apology. Seconds later, it was over. By the end of that day, 11 bodies hung in the silence of Hamelin prison. The executions were carried out quickly and efficiently, a sober end to a chapter of unspeakable cruelty. Back at Bergen-Belsen, the camp itself remained a danger. Typhus lingered in its walls, and the stench of death clung to the wooden barracks. The British made a grim decision. To stop the spread of disease, every hut, every watchtower, every trace of the camp was burned to the ground. Flames consumed the site until nothing but ash remained. It was not an act of revenge, but a final measure to protect the living. Yet even as the camp disappeared, its story did not. Survivors carried it with them. The trials etched it into history. Bergen-Belsen became more than a place. It became a symbol of what unchecked cruelty can create. The executions at Hamelin were not just punishments. They were a reckoning. They showed that even the young, even those who seemed ordinary, could become agents of extraordinary evil. They proved that silence in the face of brutality makes one complicit, and they set a precedent. Crimes against humanity would not be forgotten, and those responsible would face justice. Today, the site of Bergen-Belsen is a memorial. School children walk its grounds. Survivors return with memories that never fade, and the world pauses to remember. The trial helped shape international law and gave weight to the idea that there are crimes so grave they transcend borders and armies. The women who rose in the camps, women like Irma Grese, Hermine Braunsteiner, and Herta Ehlert, showed how power could corrupt the ordinary. Their executions left a legacy, not because of their number, but because of the questions they raised. Who were these women who stepped into uniforms and carried out such acts? How did they climb through the camp system? And what does it mean that their final chapter ended at the end of a rope? These are the questions their story forces us to face, and in answering them, we are reminded of why Bergen-Belsen must never be forgotten.